Tribe, Book 2, Todd Mills Mystery. Author, R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher, Scrib Pub, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 25. This was ridiculous. Waiting around like this in the snow, freezing his rear, not to mention his feet, his gun bouncing in the pocket of his wool coat. Paul paced back and forth near the bus stop on France Avenue and tried his best to look as if he were waiting for a bus. Instead, he was peering down the block at one specific car, Zeb's, buried nearly up to the hood in snow. There was no way anyone was driving that vehicle anywhere, at least not in the near future, which was why Rick felt comfortable leaving Paul out here while he took off to meet with that woman. "We might as well face it, Zeb's not going to come freely with us," Rick had said earlier this morning, "so maybe I can convince Janice to come back with me, and then maybe we can use her to lure Zeb either back to her house or somewhere where we can get our hands on Ripka." But that was stupid, thought Paul, his arms wrapped around his thick chest. Zeb was inside this minister's house. Zeb had the baby. That was why they'd come all the way out here to this ghastly, freezing place, to rescue Ripka, to return her to the congregation, where love and godly attention would cure her ailment. All they had to do was go right up to the house, force their way in, and settle this. All the talk, it was pointless, inane. Paul could take care of it in minutes. Something moved up the street, and Paul glanced toward the church. A couple of kids were pulling orange plastic sleds through the deep snow, and someone else was moving toward Zeb's car. Paul tensed and shrank back behind a tree. It was Zeb, tall, young and lean, and devil-possessed. That young punk had caused so much trouble. What a pain, what a fringer. But Paul knew how to take care of him and his bad attitude. Paul surveyed the situation and noted that Zeb had no child with him. So what was that idiot going to do, try and dig his way out? If so, it was even stupider than Paul guessed, for these side streets hadn't been plowed at all. Instead of taking a shovel and going to work, however, Paul watched as Zeb went to the vehicle, brushed off the driver's side, pulled open the door, and leaned in. A minute later, he re-emerged, holding a car seat, and then headed back to the small house. Oh, this was worldly. Zeb wasn't going somewhere in another car, was he? He supposed that Zeb could be using the car seat inside just for something in which to sit the baby, but that wasn't a safe guess. Paul had to assume the worst, and if Paul let Zeb and Ripka get away again, well, then he'd be laughed right out of the congregation. He glanced up and down France Avenue. Rick was nearly as stupid as his kid. He should never have left Zeb and Ripka. Were both right there, right in that house, just a short block away, so who knew what was going to happen next? And after all, Zeb could have done something crazy, like contacted the police. There was no way Paul was going to stand idly by waiting for Rick to show up. Who knew how long his little pancake breakfast would take? Besides, he could have run into trouble with that lady. So knowing what he had to do, Paul pulled up the collar of his coat, bent his head forward, then slipped his hand into his right pocket and wrapped his gloved hand around the butt of his pistol. Enough with all this crap. Paul stomped through the deep snow, his head bowed low. His immediate concern was this person Zeb was staying with, and hopefully it was in fact just one person living in that house, a minister or caretaker, because an entire family would pose a problem. So how was he going to do this? The front door was out of the question, much too direct. Paul knew that how, right in the middle of the day, with two people in that small house, was not the time to break in through a side door or window. No, he'd just have to take things a little more carefully. First, he'd circle around the church, scope out the alley, and then he would look for a heavenly sign. "Now, you're sure about this?" asked the minister, seated on the edge of the piano bench. "You know you're welcome to stay as long as you need to. No rush." Seated in a rocking chair in the living room, Zeb nodded. This guy was nice and everything. He'd given them a place to stay after all. He'd kept little Ripka, who was sleeping soundly on a blanket in the middle of the floor, and him from freezing to death in the storm. But Zeb just didn't want to be here. Mark wasn't like Suzanne's father, that supposed apostle of apostles, who always kept poking and prodding, asking questions and demanding explanations. This guy was definitely lower key, but still he kept looking at Zeb with inquisitive eyes, obviously wanting to know the who, what, and why of Zeb and his baby girl. And Zeb didn't like it. Enough of this church junk after all. Everyone at the congregation had seemed real friendly and all when he'd first returned there 3 years ago, but then, slowly, surely, they sort of tightened on him, constricted like a snake or something. "If you think your blazer can make it through this," replied Zeb, "then that would be great." "Oh, I'm the minister with four-wheel drive who can get through anything to anyone. That's not a problem at all. Rain or shine, snow or freezing temps. I can get there." "Great. I'm sure our staying here is kind of a pain." "Don't worry about that. I mean, isn't this what a church ministers are supposed to do? Shelter the weary?" "Well, I just think Ripka will be more comfortable in her own place," lied Zeb. "I'll come back for my car once I get Ripka settled and once the roads are clear." "I see." Mark rubbed his hands together in a slow, pensive manner. "And you spoke to your wife last night?" "Right, I called her. Sorry, I forgot to say. Thanks." "Everything fine?" Sure. Of course." "Okay then," said Mark, rising. "I'll go get my car started. It's back in the garage." "Do you need help?" "No, just give me a few minutes to get the engine warmed up." Mark got up and reached for the car seat, which sat on the floor by the front door. "I'll take this out." "Great. I'll start getting her ready." Listening as Mark disappeared into the kitchen, put on his boots, and zipped up his coat, Zeb hardly moved. Only when Mark went out the back door did he huff a breath of relief. Maybe he'd get out of here with no trouble at all. Above the roar of at least 2 or 3 snowblowers down the block, Paul heard the back door open and immediately flattened himself against the side of the garage. He leaned forward just a bit and, peering around the corner of the tiny building, caught a glimpse of a tall, thin man stepping through the deep snow and carrying a baby's car seat. It had to be the guy who'd taken in Zeb and Ripka, and it was immediately clear that he was intending to drive them somewhere. "Over my dead body," thought Paul. He stood quite still, listening as the guy progressed through the deep snow. Then Paul heard a jangling of keys, a door opening, and the hum of a garage door as it was electrically hoisted upward. It was all too clear, he realized. Not wasting a moment, he moved quickly along the building, slipping around the corner and right into the open garage. As the other man opened the driver's door, Paul rushed alongside the vehicle, hurrying forward and pressing his pistol at the back of the man's head. Paul calmly said, "Just be quiet and move away from the car." "What?" "Keep your voice down and move back," instructed Paul, pulling the man to the end of the car. I... What's your name?" "Mark." "Okay, Mark. I don't want to hurt you. Just tell me where the kid is." "Zeb?" "That's right. Where is he?" demanded Paul, holding the other man firmly from behind. "In the living room." "Living room? And the baby's in there too?" "Yes. What kind of trouble is he?" "Shut up! Is there anyone else in there?" No one." Mark was quick to add, "Listen, maybe I can help you?" "I'm not in need of help. The baby is. That's why I'm here. "Okay, I see," said the minister, turning around slowly. "There's just no need to." "You don't listen very well. We can work this out, if you have a..." "I said be quiet." "Yes, but..." The talkative type, Paul hated them, and he had no time for antics like this that might keep him from Ripka. So he brought back the pistol and clubbed the minister on the back of the head with one swift blow to the skull. Paul knocked out Mark, who crumpled downward. Paul eased the body down to the cement floor of the garage. "Too bad you don't belong to the true church." Working quickly lest he be seen by any snooping neighbors, Paul hurried to the wall and pushed the button. Now he thought as the garage door rattled shut onto the next. If he were smart, thought Zeb, and if he had any sense of design, he'd come up with a new style of winter clothes for kids. The neighbor lady had brought over an old snowsuit for Ripka, but how could anybody make anything as difficult to put on as this nylon outfit with its awkward zippers, the stubby little arms, and the separate hat and mittens? He was on the living room floor, nearly wrestling with his baby as he tried to get her properly bundled up, and all he could think of was how impossible this was. Trying to move Ripka's arm into one of the sleeves, he cooed and smiled at her, but that didn't help, and she let out a howl. "Oh, come on, Ripka. I know this is hard." Her arms started shaking and quivering. Zeb stopped. Okay, okay, he thought, taking a deep breath. Just be patient and get her pacifier. That'd help. That'd give her something to do while he tried to get her dressed. He glanced around, but where was it? He felt his shirt pocket, checked all around the baby blanket. Sure, the kitchen. He'd fed her not too long ago, and she'd been sucking on the pacifier while he heated her bottle. I'll be right back, little girl. Cutting through the dining room, he dashed into the kitchen, a small room with a low table by the rear window. The pacifier, however, was nowhere to be seen, and Zeb grabbed at his short hair, wanting to pull it right out of his head. As he looked around the kitchen, where the hell was it? The bedroom? Had he left it in here there by chance? Quite possibly, and he started to dash off. Just as quickly, though, he stopped. Maybe he didn't need to be rushing like this. Maybe Mark was going to have to do a fair amount of shoveling just to get his car out of the garage, in which case the last thing Zeb wanted to do was get Ripka bundled up and then have her sit around and get all hot. Turning back around, Zeb crossed quickly through the kitchen and went right up to the back door. Paul heard steps from within the house and froze, pressing himself against the outer wall. Okay, he thought with a grin. It would be only too perfect if Zeb just came out here. The baby cradled in his arms. He pictured himself just standing there as Zeb walked out. Praise Jehovah, he would say, for delivering the infant unto me. A few seconds later, though, it was clear that wasn't going to happen. Oh, the baby was in there, right inside that house. Paul could hear her crying, a real wailer, that one. He waited a moment longer, and when he was sure Zeb wasn't on the way out, he clutched the gun in his right pocket and moved forward the back door. As quietly as possible, he climbed the 3 outside steps, placed his hand on the doorknob, and turned it. Very good, it was unlocked, and he pushed, feeling the door swing easily in one quick movement. He shoved the door all the way open, pulled out his gun, and stepped inside. The small kitchen, though, was empty. Paul eased the door shut behind him, stood there trying to discern footsteps or any other movement. What he heard instead were not the sounds of a crying baby, but those of a baby laughing and cooing and some faint music. Paul took several careful steps, moving toward a door that led into the rest of the house. Reaching the edge of that passage, he paused again. Yes, the child was here somewhere. He could hear what sounded like Zeb trying to calm her. This, realized Paul, was going to be pathetically easy. He peered through the doorway, saw a large, empty dining room table, and proceeded. That room opened into the living room, a space that was filled with many chairs, and there, right in the middle of the floor, a dirty diaper. Zeb and the child, though, were not to be seen. Paul realized there was another room, one just to the left. Okay, so they were right behind that closed door. Paul could hear them clearly now, could hear the baby, the hushing sounds of her father, simple, and Paul, his gun drawn slowly and quietly, proceeded around the edge of the dining room table. When he reached the door itself, he paused, heard the laughing of a child and the soft tinkling of some lullaby. With his free left hand, he reached for the doorknob. Next, he twisted the knob, threw open the door, and charged in. The room, however, was completely empty. Shit! He cursed. On the bed was a small tape recorder, and from it emerged the baby voices and lullabies he'd heard, realizing he'd been duped. He ducked back out of the room. No, Zeb couldn't have gotten out the back way, so Paul charged through the living room, running right across the soiled diaper. He glanced up the stairs, then hurried to the front door, which he ripped open. His eyes immediately went to Zeb's half-buried car, which was still sitting there. He glanced across the street, saw some kids shoveling up the street. He noticed a vehicle, a small Jeep with a black canvas top, that was stopped right in the middle of the road, and there was Zeb, clutching the baby and talking frantically to the driver. Paul rushed out, but just as quickly, Zeb raced around the vehicle, climbed in, and then all that Paul could do was watch the Jeep chug away through the deep snow. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ
that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.